YouTube. So if you say anything deeply personal, don't worry, I'll cut it out and I'll blank out all your names so the YouTube world can't know who you are or what you think of the Bible. So let's see, it's 10:01. Let's give people another minute to get in. And if you need to get a coffee or tea, now would be the time. Oh, and there's Rosie.
Heated it up.
Okay.
Rosemary's got a birthday coming up. Can you hear me, Rosemary? Not yet.
I guess her sound's still spooling up.
She's got a stroke through the symbol.
Okay, so why don't we get started? So welcome everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. My name is Reverend Stephen Milton, as you know, and today we're going to be talking about a story which we all encounter as children in Sunday school, if you're a churchgoer, but we rarely revisit as adults. And it's one of the tougher stories in the Bible, and it's the flood story. And I thought to start, what we might do is, since this is a familiar story, perhaps we could just collectively tell the story back. Just see how much everybody remembers about this story. And then we can compare what we remembered with what we're going to read in the story later on. So, once upon a time, God said to Noah, what?
I'm stuck.
Build a ship.
Build a ship and take the animals in.
Okay, and why?
2 by 2.
Yeah, 2 by 2, great. And why is that? Why did God want Noah to do that?
Because there's a flood coming.
Yeah.
Okay, and why is there a flood coming?
We've been very, very bad.
Right. Okay, so humans have been very, very bad. So God says, I'm going to send a flood. And what is the purpose of the flood? Anybody remember?
Preserve the animals?
Yeah.
Well, the flood's not going to preserve the animals. It's going to kill
No,
them.
the ark is.
Yes, the ark will preserve the animals. But what's the purpose of the flood? Why does God decide to have a flood?
To punish humans?
Yeah.
Okay, to punish humans, right? Cool. Okay, so the animals, hi Wendy, the animals and Noah and his family get on the boat, and then what happens?
Well, the animals have to go too.
Yep, so the animals all get into the boat, and then it starts to rain, right?
The world is eliminated, restarted.
Right, so it starts to rain. How long does it rain? Anybody remember?
40 days and
40 days and 40 nights. Yeah.
There you go. 40 days and 40 nights it rains. And so it lasts for a long time, and then it stops raining. And how does Noah know when it's safe to get out of the boat?
The sun comes out.
Sorry?
The sun comes out.
There's something else. He does something active.
A bird with an olive leaf.
Right, there we go. Yeah, does anyone remember how many birds get sent out?
Oh, he sends a raven who doesn't come back and a dove who does.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so 2 birds, one that doesn't come back, the other one that comes back with an olive branch in its mouth, and then that's the sign that it must be safe to go outside. So they go outside, and then what happens?
He builds an altar.
Right.
Thank God for saving him.
Yeah, and he burned some animals, extra animals. There were extra ones. He burned some animals as burnt sacrifices to God. And then God makes a promise to Noah and humanity. Anyone remember what that promise is?
He won't bring a flood to destroy the earth again. And as a stamp of the covenant, or a sign, he puts a rainbow in the sky, puts his bow in the sky.
Right. Okay. So, see, your Sunday school education's not bad. You remember the basics of the story. That's cool. So, next question then. Do you have any problems with this story, or questions, or concerns, or comments? Things that you would like to know now that you're an adult and you're coming back at this story?
Stephen, was it enough with regard to the animals, just to have two of each one?
If you were to ask a geneticist, they'd say no. That's pretty risky. You'd prefer to have hundreds of animals for full genetic variation. So, so no is the short answer. But other questions, concerns, things you like or don't like about this story?
The concept of God being a punishing God.
Right.
I've come to terms with this story as I've seen God's actions in my reflected in my own behavior, and it led me to have a belief about God, that God has changed as God's grown up, as the world has unfolded, although probably our understanding of God is what's unfolded in our behaviors. But I know both as a young adult and maybe as a child, if as a young adult for sure, and I've seen this in my kids, if something you don't like, a product, like you don't like a piece of writing or a picture you've made or something, or a decision you've made, then you want to scratch it all out. You want to scratch it all out and start again. That is a human reaction that I think you can grow out of, and eventually just say, I'll overlay my new decision, my new picture, my new story on top of what's there. And that I think is how we come to understand God, as the story of the Bible unfolds.
But at this stage in the Bible story, God seems like he's crumpled up the painting and thrown it away, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Other concerns? Questions?
Paints everyone with the same brush, whether you're good or bad. Everybody is going to be destroyed.
Okay.
I expect you to be talking about it as a parable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get into that for sure. Okay. And is anyone bothered by the fact that this is perhaps the most famous of the Sunday school stories which we tell kids? I mean, there's so many books that, show the animals traipsing up the plank into the boat. I mean, this is a really cute story when we tell it to kids, right?
Yes, because we focus on the saving, the fact that Noah's saving, and then there'll be swirly pictures in the books with the waves and everything, and and the swirly pictures are just the rains came, and maybe they say and everybody died. I don't know, but
Yeah, I looked at some of the children's books here at Lawrence Park, and it just says the people were bad, so God decided to save Noah and his family and the animals. And then suddenly it's just the storm, and it seems like the storm is like, is just a natural disaster rather than something which God sends. So let's get, now that you've sort of retold the story as you remember it and you've expressed some of your adult concerns, let's get into some of the details on this. And I want to start with the first one, which is kind of a no-brainer, I guess. So, whoops, hang on. It's a bit of a no-brainer, and the question is just, did it actually happen? You can probably guess my answer, but I want to go into some detail about this. So we've gone through how much you remember. Okay, so did the flood really happen? Well, scientists have looked all over the place for evidence of whether the flood really happened. And they started in the 18th century as the age of science started to really blossom. And they looked for all sorts of different types of evidence. What would you want as evidence? Well, you'd want to see a bone layer which went all the way around the world of evidence of that year when all the animals but two died of every species, right? That's a big bone layer, and they have not been able to find that. In the 18th century, all sorts of amateur geologists and priests and ministers went out looking, thinking, hey, this new way of knowing science, maybe it can help us prove that things are true in the Bible. And they sometimes thought that they were onto something when they found seashells at the top of mountains and rocks. Aha, well, how else could the seashells get here? But if there was a flood and, things died. But of course, the things that have seashells would have survived. It'd be more convincing if you found a horse's skeleton in the cliff up at the top of a mountain. And they didn't find those sorts of things. And then the other thing which happened was that for a lot of people before science came along, in the West at least, the Earth was considered to be very, very young, right? It was considered to be maybe 6,000 or 7,000 years old. And no one could conceive of animals and all the variety of living things on Earth having just sort of evolved during that short period of time. So the idea of evolution just seemed impossible because there was no time. So the next most reasonable conclusion was that things had happened just the way the Bible said, where God basically said, let there be plants, and there were plants, and let there be animals, and there were animals. And at that time, they didn't really even believe in extinction the way we do. People in the past found dinosaur bones too, right? Because dinosaur bones are always eroding out of cliffs. But when they saw dinosaur bones, they said, that animal must still be alive somewhere. And this is partially why we have ideas about dragons all over the world, because there must be animals that are a lot bigger than us. And because extinction seemed impossible, since the Earth was just teeming with wildlife up until recently. If you've ever heard about the accounts of the European explorers who came to the Bay of Fundy or to the Grand Banks off of Newfoundland, and they said you could look out the ship and all you would see was fish, right? There was a plenitude to nature, which we don't have anymore, which existed in the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly in the 18th century, which suggested just nothing could ever go extinct, right? So it all seemed to suggest that, things had to be really, really short. The timeline for life on Earth had to be really, really short. But in the late 18th century, early 19th century, this man, Charles Lyell, who was a British geologist, he started really studying cliffs quite carefully. And he realized that cliffs are actually, those rocks are actually just sediment, which had been laid down by ancient oceans, which had then piled up on top of each other. And he writes a book in 1830 called The Principles of Geology. And one of his points is that the same processes which we see now, the slow formation of sediment on the bottom of lakes and oceans, those same processes have always been at work in the world. And as a result, the world must be really, really, really old because sedimentation takes so long to happen. For it to turn into cliffs, it must just take forever. So he expanded the idea of the age of the Earth being from thousands of years old to millions and millions and millions of years old. And that happened during the 19th century. And of course, that was a major challenge to the way the Bible had presented the story of life and the Earth having been basically, created by God just by saying it within the space of a week. And one of the things which Lyell said was, millions of our race are now supported by lands situated where deep seas once prevailed in earlier ages. In many districts not yet occupied by man, land animals and forests now abound where the anchor once sank into the oozy bottom. So this was a major challenge to the whole idea of how old the Earth is. And Charles Darwin relied on Charles Lyell's geology to argue, you know what, there has been enough time for animals to evolve because the world is very, very old, as proven by Charles Lyell. So in the 19th century, a great deal of doubt was sown about the whole biblical account. Science seemed to be coming up with a lot of evidence which showed that the world was way older than the Bible said, and that life had probably originated on Earth in a way which was not consistent with the Bible. So in the 19th century, you've got this sort of, anti-biblical scientific consensus starting to build that you can't trust the Bible for its historical stories, particularly something like the flood, because that's just not the way the Earth works. At the same time, as that is happening in the 19th century, anthropology is born, right? So travelers go all over the world, during the age of discovery, and they meet up with cultures from all over the world, right? The descendants of the Maya, the descendants of the Aztecs in the Americas, isolated tribes, the Japanese, all sorts of cultures all over the world that the West hadn't been really too interested in getting to know very well before, but now they were getting to know them better and learning about their folklore. And one of the things which they discovered, which was surprising to everybody, was that everywhere you go in the world, there are flood myths. There are stories about there was that time when a god decided, I've had it with human beings, so I'm going to flood the world. And then one man is told, hey, build a boat and save some animals and yourself. And then the world gets flooded and humanity and the animals survive because of the guy on the boat. These stories can be found all over the world, in Greece and Finland and India and China and Australia, and even in the Americas, like in Chile. They're not all exactly the same, but they're pretty similar. So the question was, well, whoa, wait, if the flood didn't really actually physically happen, but people believe all over the world that it did, so what's going on? So this is the sort of conundrum which biblical scholars have had with the flood story, because it didn't happen literally, but everybody seems to think that it did. So how is that possible? Well, so how did this happen? Well, a couple of questions. First of all, we know through science that mass extinctions do occur, right? There have been times in the world where almost all of the animals have died. The dinosaur asteroid being an obvious case in point, right? 65 million years ago, a comet or an asteroid hits the Earth and kills all of the dinosaurs with the exception of the creatures we now call birds. And it's only mammals that are like the size of a mouse or smaller that survive, and they get to take over the world, and some very, very small reptiles. So mass extinctions do happen. So the flood got that right? Mass extinctions happen. But what about extinctions of human beings? Well, for a long time we thought, okay, well, that's not possible either. But just this past summer, at the end of August, there was a report that came out, which is published in the journal Science, that says that based on genetic analysis, it suggests that at least 800,000 years ago, the human population all over the world crashed to a point where there was maybe 1,300 people of breeding age left. So there may have been hundreds of thousands of different types of human beings at that time, but something happened and they went down to almost nothing. And that's a long time ago, and our species, Homo sapiens, didn't exist back then. So this would have happened to the ancestors of the Neanderthals and the ancestors of Homo sapiens. But also, genetic evidence also suggests that among Homo sapiens, 70,000 years ago, there was another event, which might have been caused by a massive volcanic explosion, maybe. But what the genetics suggests is that human beings crashed to around 1,000 individuals. And this is like a big, big problem, because if you're living through this, whatever that event was, everybody around you dies. And it's not like all the 1,000 survivors would all be in one place, right? They'd be scattered. So from your perspective, it would be like, everybody's dead. We're going to die. Everybody is dead. And they can tell this through our DNA. There's not as much variation in human DNA as there should be. Now, the thing is, 70,000 years ago, human beings could talk. We already had that ability. And we could talk, and we could tell stories, and we could pass on stories. And so you can imagine that this event, whatever caused it, would have made a really deep impression on the human beings who survived. Remember that time when we were almost all wiped out, when we saw everybody we knew die? That makes a deep impression. And that might explain why there are flood myths all over the world. Because everybody on Earth is the descendant of the people who survived that near extinction event 70,000 years ago, right? Like everybody else before that died except for the 1,000 people. So all of the people of the Earth who have ever lived since then are related to the people who survived that event. So those people spread out across the Earth, some to Europe, some to Asia, eventually some all the way to the Americas. they all carry a story about there was this time when things got really bad and we almost all died, but some of us survived. So even though there's no scientific evidence that the flood happened the way the Noah story says it does, it's a scientific fact that mass extinctions occur and that human extinction we've come to the brink of extinction a couple of times. So just sort of put that in your back pocket, that this story, which seems so radically unlikely, actually has a sort of scientific background to it, even if it isn't the way it plays out. Now, let's talk about the Bible myth as we have it. The ancient Israelites lived in what is now the land of Israel, and they were surrounded by other cultures. They were small. They weren't a big deal. They were surrounded by two empires, the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Babylonians had their city, Babylon, in what is now Iraq. Babylon's around 70 miles outside of Baghdad. That's where they found the ruins for Babylon. And the Assyrians were located in what is now Syria. Okay, those two cultures had flood myths. And in the year 587, the Babylonians come and they attack Judah, which is the southern part of Israel, having already conquered northern Israel. The Assyrians did that. But in the year 587, a siege occurs around Jerusalem, which leads to the fall of the Jewish people in Jerusalem, and they all have to leave. The elite end up going to Babylon. They're taken captive to Babylon. Okay, Babylon's a major city with gigantic temples called ziggurats, and they are held captive there for 70 years. While they're in Babylon, they learn the stories of their religion, the Babylonian religion. And the Babylonians have a flood myth too, as do the Assyrians and all the Middle Eastern cultures. The Jews are a conquered race. They're nobodies. They're prisoners of war. Okay? They take their religion to this strange place where they make sacrifices to multiple gods every single day. They have massive statues in their temples of their gods. There's priests that serve them food every day, burnt offerings and so forth. It's a very, very different religion. And the Jews have to hear over and over again the Babylonian creation myth. And it's got a story of a flood in it. So I thought of having you guys read this, but that would take a while. Fortunately, somebody on YouTube decided to make a cartoon of it. So I'm going to show you that. Okay. So just watch this and try and keep track in your head of how this story is different from the story that you've learned through the Bible.
A long time ago, when there were just the gods, Anu ruled the sky, Enki ruled the seas, and Enlil ruled the earth. The greater gods burdened the lesser gods with laborious tasks. They were forced to do heavy, burdensome labor. The lesser gods were forced to dig the Tigris River and the Euphrates. They were ordered to heap up the mountains. Fed up with their work, the lesser gods set fire to their tools and demanded to see their foreman Enlil. At night, they surrounded Enlil's temple. The mob was halted by the gatekeeper, who asked, "Who declared war? Who has brought battle to Enlil?" The lower gods explained the pains of their burdensome labor. They sought reckoning with Enlil. The greater gods discussed the matter and a solution was proposed. The mother goddess would create humans in order to carry the burden of labor, freeing the lesser gods from their pain. The gods agreed, and Enki made a plan. But in order to make humans, one of the gods must be sacrificed. Wei Ilu offered himself. His blood was mixed with clay, and after spitting on the clay, the job was done. The mother goddess formed humans out of the clay. And now, the humans would be burdened with the labor of the gods. At first, the gods enjoyed their new leisure, but as time passed and the population increased, the humans grew large in number and became too noisy, greatly disturbing the gods. The racket disturbed Enlil so that he could not sleep. So to stop the noise, he sent a drought to decimate the human population. And it didn't work. The humans repopulated and their commotion continued. Frustrated by the continuing noise, Enlil sent a famine to kill the humans. And it didn't work. The humans repopulated and their commotion continued. Finally, Enlil had enough, and he prepared to send a great flood to destroy the humans. Now, among the humans, Atrahasis was the wisest and most heroic. Enki went behind Enlil's back and appeared to Atrahasis in a vision, warning him of the incoming peril. He told him about the flood and ordered him to build a boat that would save his life. Atrahasis, together with the elders, gathered materials and began construction of the great vessel. He would take his family with him, as well as many animals. Once on board, he sealed the door shut. But Atrahasis was saddened because of the impending destruction. Meanwhile, above the skies, Adad the storm god brought forth the mighty flood, and the deluge came down. It was such a great catastrophe that even the gods themselves were terrified. The deluge lasted 7 days and 7 nights. When the storm finally subsided, the humans had all been wiped out. But the gods became hungry. There were no humans to offer them sacrifices, their farmers all wiped out. Their dismay turned to joy when they discovered Atrahasis had survived and he had offered sacrifices to the gods. Smelling the delicious food, they came down to feast. However, Enlil became furious at Enki for revealing his plan, but Enki shrewdly calmed him down, explaining to Enlil that he was preserving life. The two made a pact to stop the humans becoming too noisy again. They agreed to limit their number. They introduced death for all humans. They introduced infant mortality and made a third of women infertile. They also created priests and priestesses who would be celibate their whole lives. As for Atrahasis, no one knows. The story ends there, but some believe that he was carried away to paradise to live away from the new humans. And thus ends the epic of Atrahasis.
Hey, thanks for watching.
That's a good story.
Yeah. So, okay, so what do you make of that story, though? Would you like to have those gods as your gods? Let's start there. Yes, you would like to be enslaved by the gods? Is that a good idea? Okay, so how is this story different than ours? Like, without getting into ours, just what does this story tell you about the nature of the universe? If you were to show this cartoon to little kids who had no idea about how the universe worked, and you said, this is how the universe works, what sort of values do you think the kids would derive from this story about their place in the universe and how the universe works? Is the universe a nice place?
Not so much.
It's not a safe place. These gods don't have wisdom. They didn't think through, for instance, destroying the humans and ending up hungry. So they're not very wise. They seem to be reactionary.
Yep, fair enough. And what is their view of slavery?
The humans were only there to serve the gods' needs, or to not to serve their needs, but to alleviate the tiresome work from them.
Right, and who did the tiresome work before the humans?
The lesser gods.
Yeah, so slavery is baked into the universe, right? Like, if you happen to be a slave in Babylon, the creation story you're told is once upon a time, the gods created slavery, and when the lesser gods got tired of being slaves, they created you, humans, to be slaves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you happen to be a slave in Babylon, you've been told, hey, stop complaining. This is how the universe works. And if you're a human being in Babylon and you're saying, I'm suffering, this story says, get used to it. That's how the universe works. If the gods are willing to enslave themselves, of course they will enslave you, right? And what did the humans do to annoy the gods so that the gods wanted to destroy the humans?
They were rowdy.
Yeah, they're rowdy. They made a lot of noise, right? So does this suggest that human beings are allowed to enjoy themselves and have parties and concerts? And no, right? What should humans do? If they're not allowed to be rowdy, what should they do?
They should be grateful to be slaves and get on with doing their job.
Yeah, they should be grateful to be slaves, and they should just be quiet and do the work. And don't expect life to be enjoyable. Just be miserable, because that's the way it works. Okay?
But kids here, though, be seen and not heard sometimes when they're even rowdy too.
Yeah, we have that,
Current
but
day.
it hasn't worked out that way. Kids today are pretty loud, right? So I just want you to understand that, in real life, the ancient Israelites were taken captive by the Babylonians for 70 years in Babylon. This isn't just something which is in the Bible, it's also attested to by Babylonian records, and the Babylonians were really good record takers. While the Jews were in Babylon, they learned these creation myths, and then they decided to write down their own. Because what you may not, when you walk into a house, right? When you walk into a house, you walk up onto the porch, you ring the doorbell, the door opens, you walk into the living room, you walk into the kitchen, you talk to people. Sometimes you'll say, so how long have you been living here? And they'll say, oh, well, we've been living here for 15 years, but we had to do a bunch of renovations when we first arrived. And so, we knocked down some walls on this first floor and we put in a new porch. When you walk into a house, you don't go, I only want to be in the original parts of the house. So I'm going to avoid the porch. I'm going to come in through the back. I don't want to go into the new kitchen because we don't do that. The whole house is the whole house. We don't care when it was renovated. The Bible is like that too. The Bible has been renovated many, many, many times. Okay? There's not just one author of the Bible. There's many authors of the Bible. And the reason I'm telling you this is that the flood story, most of the flood story was written during the Babylonian captivity. And all of the first creation account, the 7 days of creation, was written during the Babylonian captivity. So the Jews were surrounded by a slave-based culture that was highly exploitive and violent, believed in multiple gods who were cruel, okay? And they decided to write down what they thought the universe was like by writing down their story about how the universe began. So with this in mind, the very slave, violent-based, let's cut up a god and use his blood to create slaves out of them. With all that in mind, I'd like us to read a little bit of the 7 days of creation account, which was written while the Jews were in Babylon. And just as you hear it,
about the shoes.
As you hear it, just keep in the back of your mind how it's different from what we just saw in that cartoon. Okay, so can I ask everybody to read? Is everybody game? Patricia, are you ready to read too? And iPhone, I'm not sure who you are, but no. Okay, I'm going to call on everybody who I can see at least to read. All right. So is that okay? Is everybody all right to read? Okay, great.
Yep.
So
Now, if you're wondering to yourself,
goodbye, sir. Okay, so Ray, could you read this first page, please?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters.
Thank you. And Liz, could you read this next page, please?
Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
Great, thank you. And Lynn, if you could read this page, please.
God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day.
And Lynn, could you read this page too, please?
Then God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day.
Great, thank you. And Kathy, could you read this page, please?
Then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good.
Thank you. And Isabel, could you read this, please?
Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day.
Great, thank you. And now we're going to skip ahead a bit. And Wendy, could you read this part, please?
And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good.
Great, and could you read this, please?
Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth."
Great, thank you. And Rosie, could you read this, please? You're muted, Rosie.
So God created humankind in God's image. In the image of God were they created, male and female. God created them.
And could you read this too, please, Rosie?
God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food.
Thank you. And I'll read this part. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. There was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that God had done. God rested on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that God had done in creation. Okay, so that's most of our account. I skipped a bit in the middle. What kind of place is the universe according to this story? What does God...
Hierarchical.
Sorry?
Hierarchical.
Okay, who's in charge?
The humans.
Okay, and who are they in
Or
charge?
God.
God.
God, then humans.
Okay, and what does God say at the end of most of the days of creation? And it was
good.
Good.
Yeah, and it was good.
Keep saying that. And it was good. And it was good. And it was good. Okay, so compare this to the story, the cartoon that we saw, that the Jews were surrounded by during the captivity in Babylon. Was the universe a good place in the Babylonian captivity myth? No, it's a place of slavery and murder and war. Who goes to war in the 7 days of creation?
No one.
No one. Who gets chopped up into bits and their blood spilled on the ground?
No one.
No one. Do the gods in the Babylonian myth, do they share power with anybody? Nope. Nope. They just keep finding slaves, right? If the lesser gods won't be the slaves, then humans will be the slaves. In our creation,
they were fighting and angry among themselves and about each other's actions. To me, the difference between the Bible creation story and the Babylonian one seems intent on explaining human behavior and society, whereas the biblical one is actually a little bit of botany and zoology. It explains and describes the natural world.
it does. And one of the things which, it's sort of obvious that the Babylonians have created a creation myth which justifies the way their society works, right? They live in a highly hierarchical society where there are kings and priests at the top, and then at the bottom there are slaves, and that's the way it should be. And so they tell a creation story that says the universe is structured on this principle, that there's going to be people in charge and other people who are just going to be slaves, right? And so it's kind of a transparently self-justifying justification of the social hierarchy of Babylonian society, right? The 7 days of creation suggest that creation was created in a way that human beings cannot do. It's not a reflection of human society. At no point can you walk up and say, let there be plants, and there are plants. We can't do that. We can enslave other people, but we can't make nature come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
That is not in our power. And this is something about the ancient Israelite way of seeing reality, where they say God is not a figment of our imaginations. God is actually very different from human beings. God has powers which we do not have. And God has a world-encompassing compassion and love for creation, which we often can't find in ourselves. Right? God spends 7 days of creation saying, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. Human beings don't always walk around like that. Right? We often say, and it was bad, and then it got worse, right? Whereas God's saying, and it's good, and it's good, and it's good. So the Hebrews are saying, I am surrounded by a culture that thinks that slavery is the way the gods want it. I don't agree. We disagree. We think the universe is based on a different principle, which is love, where God made the universe in love and said at every stage, it was good, it was good, it was good. Okay? So now let's go forward and take a look at the flood myth, because we know that in real life, things aren't always good, right? Human beings can be really, really nasty to each other. So the key thing to understand is that the universe was created to be good, and human beings were created in God's likeness to share that goodness and embody that goodness. Like that's the mandate at the beginning of the Bible. This is the way it should be, right? So let's find out what happens next. So we're going to skip ahead a bit. We're going to go to Genesis 6, which is the prelude to the flood. What's happened just before that is Adam and Eve eat the apple, get punished for it, get kicked out of the Garden of Eden for their disobedience. Cain, who is their son, kills Abel, right? And when Cain kills Abel, Abel's blood drains into the ground, and the ground itself gets upset and cries out to God. It's so upset to have Abel's blood in it. And you may have noticed at the end of the creation myth that we just heard, like the 7 days of creation, it says that every beast on earth who has life in them, so that's humans and animals, are given the right to eat plants. But there's no mention of eating meat. Okay? So in the beginning, everybody was vegan. So blood was not supposed to be spilled. So when blood is spilled, when Cain gets killed, the ground itself complains. Okay? And then there's a genealogy which comes next, and then we hit the text that we're about to read. So I need 3 readers for this bit. So this is the prelude to the flood. Okay, Isabel and Kathy and anybody else? Okay, I'll do the last one. Okay, Ray? Great. So Isabel, Kathy, and Ray. And they're all quite short. Okay, Isabel, if you could read this, please. You're muted, Mom. You're still muted.
We had some background noise before. When men began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they took to wife such of them as they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, but his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown.
Okay, thank you. And Ray, if you could go next, please.
The Lord saw that the wickedness of humanity was great in the earth, and that every imagination of their thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that to have made man on the earth, and it grieved God to God's heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the ground, man and beast and creeping things, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Thank you. And Kathy, if you could read this part, please.
These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so I know the prelude is a little confusing because it speaks of sons of gods seeing that women were fair and coming into the ones that pleased them. And then it also talks about the Nephilim. And this account is so brief that it suggests that the Jews are taught, like the people who wrote this, believe that their readers understand what this is all about already. And the sons of God have been interpreted in two ways. One is that they're fallen angels who swooped down, saw that women were lovely, and just picked the ones that they wanted, raped them, and had children with them. The other possibility is that there were basically two lines of human beings at this time. On the one hand, there were the sons of Cain, sons and daughters of Cain, and there were the sons and daughters of the third son, which Adam and Eve had after Abel's death, whose name was Seth. Seth was a good guy, and so his line were righteous people, and Cain's line were unrighteous people. And it may be that so there's different interpretations of this. The descendants of Cain may have raped the daughters of Seth. It's unclear, but what is clear is that violence is upon the world, right? When you hear of gods choosing which women they find sexy and then having their way with them, that's rape. And this text is saying God created everything to be really good, but what happened was that suddenly there is rape upon the earth, and all sorts of women are having babies who they don't want to be having. And out of these unions come the men of renown. And I don't know if you remember when you were a kid, when you read Greek myths, Zeus was always swooping down, finding some sexy maiden, having sex with her, and against her will. And then Zeus's wife would find out and get really mad and usually curse the woman or curse the kid. But often the product of a union between a god and a human is a hero. Someone who has got the power of the gods in them, but they're in a human body. So Hercules is like this. Hercules, others, these sort of god slash men are, they're the big strong ones, the ones who can, fight the lions and win. Pagan myth makes a big deal out of these human god combinations, but the people who wrote the prelude to the flood said, no, wait. If it wasn't consensual with the women, then these guys are not heroes. They may be well-known, men of renown, but they're not heroes. And when God sees what's happening on earth with these sons of God human unions through sexual assault, God does not say, hey, human beings are even better than before. God looks down on it and says, violence has corrupted the earth. This is awful. And we can see this in the language which is used. Let me just compare two texts here. So we didn't read this part of the Genesis myth, but when Eve is offered the apple by the serpent, the way it's written is, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. So she saw something that was desirable, and then she took it. Okay? Took something she wasn't supposed to take. Right? Like that's the whole key to that story. This is forbidden fruit. They weren't supposed to go near that tree. She saw that it was good. It looked tasty. The serpent had told her it would make her more like God, which she didn't need because she'd already been made in the likeness of God. He lied to her, but she saw something and she took it. And then the language used for what the sons of gods did with the women of the earth is the same. Genesis 6. Number 2, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they took to wife such of them as they chose. The language is very deliberate. It's trying to say, just as what Eve did was wrong, so is what the sons of gods were doing with the human women. Saw and took, saw and took. And I know that this is kind of hazy for us because, like, what are Nephilim? What are these sons of gods? Like, it's all kind of murky to us. But the fact that God is not happy about it seems pretty clear. And one of you said, when I asked you about your sort of views on this, why, God comes across as a punishing God. Kathy, you said that. And Lynn, you said that, this one of the reasons this story is distasteful is because everyone is treated the same, right? Like all the human beings are treated the same and they all get wiped out, right? The story is saying that actually all of the human beings have been corrupted through this process of rape and sexual assault and crossbreeding with the sons of gods. Everybody is corrupt except for Noah and his immediate family. Everybody else has become corrupted. And it's gotten so bad that there aren't any real human beings on Earth anymore. And that's what this story is saying, which is weird for us. But I'd like to suggest a modern analog to this. If you follow science fiction or horror at all, you may be aware of the phenomenon known as the zombie apocalypse, right? The zombie apocalypse is in all sorts of movies since the 1960s. Usually it's a disease of some kind that turns people into flesh-eating monsters where they can't be killed. They just roam the earth saying brains, brains, and they want to eat brains. And they bring the earth to a complete standstill, where there's a few remaining human beings who are virtuous and uninfected, and everybody else is a monster. That's what this story is saying. That the reason the flood happened was because everybody on Earth had become a monster, and it even infected the ground itself and the other species with their corruption, because what humans do and what happens to nature are intricately related, intimately related. And so God decides for a great do-over. And God says, nope, I want to start over. This is not what I wanted. That creation which was good, and it was good, and it was good. Well, now it's rotten and disgusting and gross and violent and terrible. And the only way to fix it is to wipe those human God half-breeds off the face of the earth. And so God decides to extend the violence to such a point that hopefully it'll reset it all so that this sort of corruption won't be there anymore. Mom?
Should we build a boat?
Sorry?
Should we build a boat now?
Yeah, we can definitely build a boat. Absolutely, we can build a boat.
But individuals aren't allowed to say who goes into the boat with them because they'll just be tribal and only trust their own at this particular time.
Yeah. And there's something else at work here too, but let's get into the boat business. So can I get 2 readers for this next bit? Isabel and me. I'll do the other one. Okay, so we did that already. Okay. Okay, Isabel, if you could read this part, please.
This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which the breath of the life from under heaven, everything that is on the earth shall die.
But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come into you, to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you, and you for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Okay, so God's chosen one guy and said, okay, I want you to be the last remnant and bring all the animals, because God loves humanity and God loves the animals. So God wants this to continue, but he wants the corruption to end. Now, if you were Noah and God said to you, I'm going to kill absolutely everything except for your family and pairs of animals, what would your reaction be?
Horror.
Horror, okay. Yeah, expand on that a bit.
Well, I mean, Noah's not in the position to know about everybody else's sins, just those around him.
Yeah, but you'd be horrified, right? Like, oh my goodness, really? Seriously, you're going to do that? Would you say, doesn't this seem a bit over the top, God? Right?
Like, why me?
Yeah, why me, for sure.
Yeah.
And really?
Well,
Everybody?
people, oh no, am I getting my history backwards? No, I'm not. So compare Noah, who accepts God's statement and then goes on and does what God instructs him in a kind of way that slaves are used to doing what masters say. Compare that with Abram and the visitors before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abram argues with God and says, you sure you're going to destroy it? What if there's 50 good people? What if there's 10? It gets all the way down to 10. And then he decides that he can't argue with God. He can't go the whole way and tell God not to destroy anything. But he speaks out like a free person.
Right, exactly. Very, very good point. And this is why among the Jewish people, they don't consider Noah to be a Jew.
Mm.
They consider Abraham to be the first Jew because he argues with God. We are not supposed to meekly accept genocide. Noah would have been a much better person had he said, wait a second, that's insane. You can't do that. What if there's 10 people out there who are still good, right? Like that sort of argument is what you're supposed to have with God, because we are made in God's image, right? Which means not just that we look like God, whatever that means, in fact that we don't all look the same, but we are supposed to have the same ability, or at least potential, for compassion, right? So Abraham was showing that Abraham was a person not raised as a Jew, but who starts acting like a Jew because he wrestles with God. And that's what Israel means, right? One who wrestles with God. Abraham stands up and says, wait, if you're the God of compassion, what about the 50? If there were 50, if there were 40, if there were 30, if there were 10? Noah does none of that. And so it's interesting. I think you're onto something, Wendy, that, given the fact that they have the Babylonian creation myth in mind, where humans are just stupid slaves, right? Noah's acting like a slave in front of his master. Humanity, in the sense of having compassion for somebody else, hasn't taken full. He may be obedient, but he's not fully human, right? He's just going to do what he's told. And what he's told to do is to build a really, really big boat. And it's described as being this many cubits high, and it's kind of hard to get our head around what that is. Fortunately, however, our Christian brothers and sisters in Kentucky have taken it upon themselves to build one which is exactly the right size. So I'm going to show you a little video to give you a sense of just how big the ark was. This is from the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, and just check it out.
Well, it's a lot of species, so it's going to take a lot of space.
Good morning, Patrick Kanuski. I'm the Director of Operations at the Ark Encounter. This ark that you see here is a direct representation of the biblical account of Noah and the flood. So what we've done here is we've taken the true dimensions of the Bible in Genesis and we've replicated a full-size ark. But in 2004 even, the first thoughts about doing an ark replica was thought about, and it just kept moving up on the to-do list. And then eventually broke ground in the summer of 2014, and then we opened the Ark Encounter in July of 2016. Since that time, we've had hundreds of thousands of people come through here. It's got rave reviews.
Mm.
It's bigger than I imagined.
It's really, really, really big, which, you know, all things considered makes it realistic in one way. It would need to be really, really, really big to take in all the animals. But on the other hand, you know, you're not going to get all of Earth's species in there.
Wonder how it would compare to today's ocean liner.
Yeah, I was wondering, a football field, is it half a football field, a whole football field?
No, it's actually like 3 or 4 football fields long.
Really?
Yeah, it's really, really big.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just huge. And it's, yeah, you know, it's big, but like what we should keep in mind is the Jews are disagreeing with their neighbor's account of how the ark worked, right? So if you know that you're writing a story which is completely different from the next person's story, then that kind of implies that you're not sure that your story is absolutely right, but you're certain that they're wrong. Like this whole flood story is not about what really happened, because as I established earlier on, the flood didn't really happen. But the Jews were saying, if the flood happened, there's no way it happened for the reasons the Babylonians said it did, because we don't believe that God is a slave master. We don't believe that the universe is fundamentally rotten and hierarchical and violent, where gods get chopped up to make human beings. Instead, we think that the universe is fundamentally good, and the only reason God would destroy the world is if it got too violent, to end the violence. See the difference? Like, you don't have to believe in the 21st century that the flood happened or that the Genesis flood account is true. But I hope what you'll come away with this from is a sense that God wants us to live in harmony with each other and not in violence with each other. And the universe was not built based on violence. Okay, so
Stephen, I reading the Genesis account of God's instructions on how to build it and then seeing how big it is. So my understanding is that the elite from Jerusalem and Judea were taken into Babylon, and they were sort of like Daniel and the other guys given positions where they were in charge of things. And like the fact, and they must have been in charge of building projects, and maybe this was a way of showing their competence, that they could envisage not just building a temple or houses or bathhouses, but they could imagine building a boat when they only had the Euphrates to float on. And just a way of, like, it seems to me the beginning of engineering.
Yeah, I mean,
and the admiration of the technical and skills and reasoning skills that these so-called slaves had. They came up with this beautiful botany and zoology about in the creation story. They came up with engineering in the flood story. It I don't know, just makes me pause.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, Daniel's story happens among the Persians, not the Babylonians.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is that actually the pagan accounts, like the Babylonian account and the Akkadian account of the flood story, is much more specific about how they built the boat. Like, it talks about how long it took, how many workmen were used, what kind of workmen, whereas the Jewish account is just build a big boat and boom, the boat must have been built somehow and away we go. Like, it's so sketchy on the details that it suggests that don't take this part too seriously. This is more a morality tale than a practical story, because we're not even going to give you the practical details of how a family of 8 could have built something this massive. Later Christians would argue that, like Cyril of Jerusalem made the point that a boat this big would have taken 100 years to build. And so that was 100 years for the pagans around Noah to repent because they'd say, hey, why are you building that boat? Oh, because there's a big flood coming to wipe everybody out. Well, that would give them 100 years to repent, and they didn't still. So God is slow to anger, but people are stupid and recalcitrant. Okay, so let's carry on with the story. I'll read this part. So they have to get into the boat. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. And rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the cattle according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, every bird according to its kind, every bird of every sort. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And they that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily upon the earth that all the high mountains under the whole of heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, birds, cattle, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm upon the earth, and every man. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. God blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Okay, any reactions to that? If you were an English teacher and you gave elementary students an assignment to write up an account of the flood, and that's what they gave you, and you were marking it according to clarity and conciseness, what would you say to the student?
Did AI do this?
How realistic can it be that Noah is 600 years old?
Yeah, that's just a thing. He gets to be like 900 years old, I think. Back in the day, they lived a long time.
Yeah, big time.
But does it seem repetitive?
That's true. It's almost like it's a song and you could sing it.
Yeah, it's long-winded, right? Like it repeats itself a lot, and this of this kind, and this of this kind, and this of this kind, right? And all the creeping things and all the flying things, blotted out, blotted out, blotted out. There's a lot of word repetition in it. And the reason for that is because 2 different writers wrote it. One of the things which biblical scholars started to realize in the late 19th century was that some texts showed signs of 2 different authors or more. And in this case, you can see it because the white is written by one author and the red is written by the same author that wrote the original account of Genesis 1 that we read, the 7 days of creation. And one of the ways you can tell is because there's inconsistencies. At 17 here up at the front, the flood continued 40 days upon the earth, right? At the bottom, 24, written by someone else, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So 40 days or 150 days, what is it? There are inconsistencies in the text because it was actually written by different people, and then they sewed it together later on. And I won't bore you with the details, but if you take the chunk which the people who wrote it during the Babylonian exile, when they wrote the bit of the flood, that everything of its kind, of its kind, of its kind, of its kind, that is exactly the same language as when God creates creatures in the 7 days of creation, and it was created according to its kind, according to its kind, according to its kind. It's the same language because it's the same person who wrote it, and they want us to see that the flood isn't just a destruction; it's also a creation story. And when the flood ends, oh, let's see, maybe I can show you this. When the flood ends, it deliberately makes a reference to the creation story. Yeah, here. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. The writer, the ones who wrote this during the Babylonian period are known for being really big sticklers for numbers, which is why there's so much specific numbers on which day of the month, which month it was. But look at this. What we just heard from the priestly account, so the guys who wrote the flood during the Babylonian period, this bolded text, and God made a wind to blow over the earth, the beginning of the end of the flood, and the waters subsided. In Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, and the Spirit being the breath of God. So God makes a wind to end the flood. God made a wind to start creation. So it's just trying to guide us all the way through. Creation was made good. The flood is actually good news in that it wipes away the corruption which had infected humanity and gives them a clean slate to start anew. That's the way it's being presented. Questions, comments, things that make sense, things that don't?
That's really interesting way of looking at it. I really appreciate this. It's really good food for thought. That, there is some sense of God wishing for the best for us. So when it's not there, taking steps or changing the path, perhaps. I wonder what is in store at this point in time.
Yeah, Stephen, you said recently that God repented doing this and that would only do it once.
Yeah, so that's what happens next in the story. Why don't I just pull that up? So I'll skip. Well, I'll just read shortly the bit about the birds. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made and sent forth a raven, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put forth his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. 2 birds, one a blackbird, the other one not a blackbird. What happens with the blackbird?
It's lost. It's gone.
It leaves and it doesn't come back, but the text says that it went to and fro until it found land. Right? So it flies out of the ark, it doesn't return, it eventually finds land. I'll just pull that up because it's easy to miss. So
So it's not being a messenger for Noah. It doesn't have a relationship with Noah where it wants to bring news.
That's right. It makes a one-way journey for itself, right?
Mhm.
So Noah sent forth a raven at 7 here, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. So it flew around until there was a place to land. But there's no suggestion that it came back, which is why Noah let the dove out, right? And I just want to, like, this is such a subtle little thing, but it's really cool. The Babylonian story isn't a morality tale. It's a justification for slavery and cruelty, right? It's a justification for a cruel society. This story, however, is a morality tale, and it does it in even the smallest of details. In some of the Babylonian versions of this story, 3 birds are sent out, a raven, a swallow, and a dove. Different order, same result, but each bird comes back. In this story, the raven goes out, and we're told it flies around until it finds dry land. So it goes out, and it's just looking for number 1. It's just taking care of itself, right? And it's surely not a coincidence that the Bible writer chose a blackbird for this, because in the West, blackbirds are considered to be evil birds, right? Suspicious birds, self-serving birds. The raven is being self-serving. It doesn't come back to tell the ark, oh, I found some dry land. It just flies around until it finds something that works for it, right? The dove, on the other hand, flies out, doesn't see anything, comes back, flies out again, finds an olive branch, could have stayed on land, but doesn't. Brings the olive branch back to the boat. 2 birds, 2 different moral conceptions. One is looking out for number 1. The other one is cooperative and compassionate, who brings back a sign to not just Noah, but all the animals on the boat. Hey, there's a place for us to land. We'll be able to eat again. It's going to be good. And then the last time the bird's sent out, it stays where it is, but it's delivered its message, right? And when Jesus is baptized, we are told that the Holy Spirit came out of the heavens like a dove and entered him. Like a dove, not as a dove, but like a dove. And that's very, very explicitly supposed to remind us of this story in the ark. Where what we want is the spirit that is helpful and compassionate and will go out of its way to help us, as the dove did. And that branch in the dove's mouth, that olive branch, has become a symbol of peace everywhere. And the United Nations symbol has a dove with an olive branch in its mouth because of this story. Okay, so we're almost done, but it'd be a pity to end without getting to the rainbow. So let me get to the rainbow.
It'd be disaster to forget the rainbow.
Yeah, I didn't get to the rainbow the last time I did this, and I felt really bad, so I want to get there. Okay, so I'm going to skip this because they get out of the ark, and he says, God says, let everybody out. And then Noah does, he creates an altar, and so I'll read this. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And so then I'm just going to skip over this. So be fruitful and multiply. Everything should be fruitful and multiply. You'll be able to eat meat. And then to the rainbow. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh."
Hmm.
And it's really critical that we understand the language here, the bow, right? Bow and arrow. So this is the machine gun of its time, and God is hanging up God's bow in the sky. It's pointing so that if God ever wanted to use it, it would go into the heavens, not to the earth. So it's this massive peace symbol in the sky saying, I will never, ever commit genocide again. I will never threaten the life of the earth again. Right? So in this story, which I've been trying to bring out the details that God is fundamentally against violence, the end of the story is God saying, never again will there be planetary violence caused by me. So it's not just pretty. it's used as a sign of peace, right? There's a peace symbol in the sky. And this doesn't work for us so much because we're, hip 21st century people who know how the weather works. But if you believe that all bad weather and all natural disasters came from the gods, and you believe that the flood had been sent by God, then if you didn't have this guarantee, every time really dark clouds gathered, you'd wonder, is it going to happen again? You would live in fear of being destroyed by God. And that is basically what pagan cultures believed in, right? They believed unless they kept making sacrifices to the gods would punish them. Whereas the Jews say that is not at all the way the universe works. In fact, our God, who was responsible for this flood that everybody believes happened, our God said this would never happen again. Not that we should live in fear, but rather that we should live in confidence that God would never do that to us again. And God doesn't want us to do that to each other. And we know that because the last time we became zombies killing each other, God wiped out the earth. And the implication here is that God's not going to come to our rescue again to stop that kind of horrific violence. So we're going to have to figure it out. It's up to us to make sure that the world doesn't become a place of unending violence. With God's help, of course. But God's not going to hit the reset button ever again. So this story actually hands us a degree of moral authority which we didn't have before. I think I will finish it there.
And we would never have known all this as a child when we learned that story. Even it's hard to believe even now when we
It
hear.
takes an hour and a half to explain now, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we can all forgive ourselves for not telling this version of the story to children. But it's good to return to it as adults and really chew over it.
And eventually they'll get there with this and figure it out too, or learn about it.
Or maybe not.
Maybe not.
Or maybe not.
Maybe not. No, maybe not.
Very interesting, Stephen. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Great.
Thank you for coming.
Great insight.
Sorry, Ray?
A great insight that we didn't have before, or I didn't have before.
Yeah, sure.
Did you have a good group on Tuesday night, Stephen?
We have about 14 or 15 people, I guess. Yeah. It was good.
Good.
So I'm not sure which of these. I'll probably use this recording because we got further because there's just more people last time. There's more conversation. I'll use this recording and I'll make it available next week. I need to blank out your names and stuff. But sometime next week it'll be available in case you want to see it again or you want to suggest to somebody else that they take a look.
Or Bonnie wants it. Yeah.
Okay.
You have my permission to replace with pretty person one.
Oh, now we come up with our own names, do we? You can call
think
me
we're-
the wheelie one.
I may just blot out your names. That might be easier.
Okay.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much,
you.
Stephen. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bye, Wendy. Good to
Bye.
see
Stay
you
dry
as
if you
always.
can.
Happy
Bye-bye.
future birthday,
Thank
Rosemary.
you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
remembering.